The wallet hit the tile before he noticed. Receipts slid, and a small silver ring rolled free, flashing in the winter light. 39-year-old Daniel Harper froze. That ring was all he had left of his late wife, Emily. When he looked up, both were gone. Before we dive in, drop a comment with where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. Let's begin. On a crisp, sunlit winter afternoon, the mall looked almost unreal. Holiday lights blinking softly above polished floors, wreaths hung like borrowed hope, and sunlight spilling through the glass roof as if the sky itself had decided to be kind. Daniel Harper didn't feel any of it. He moved through the crowd with the careful focus of a man who'd learned how quickly life could rip something away. 39, broad-shouldered, tired around the eyes in a way sleep didn't fix. He'd come for one simple errand. Sophie needed new gloves, and the school winter concert was tomorrow. Then his wallet slipped. It hit the tile with a sharp sound that didn't belong in the cheerful noise. Cash fluttered. A few receipts skated away like dry leaves. And something small, something that shouldn't have been loose, rolled out from the fold. A silver ring. Emily's ring. Daniel's breath stopped as if the air had been stolen. He dropped to a knee, hands shaking, eyes tracking the tiny blue gem as it spun and caught the sunlight, and then, with one final roll, vanished between moving shoes. No, no, please. The word came out broken. He crawled forward, ignoring the looks. He searched under a bench, then under a stroller someone pushed away too fast. He stood, turning in circles, scanning faces that didn't see him. A security guard asked if he needed help, but Daniel couldn't even explain without choking on the truth. That ring wasn't jewelry. It was his last physical proof that Emily had been real. That the life before the phone call, before the hospital corridor, before the silence, had existed. He retraced his steps to the escalator near the coffee kiosk. He checked the trash openings. He stared at the floor until his eyes watered from the glare. Nothing. The mall's closing announcement echoed faintly overhead. 15 minutes, then 10. People drifted toward the exits with bags and laughter, warm and careless. Daniel sank onto a food court bench like his bones had suddenly turned to sand. He pressed his palms over his eyes. He'd promised her. He'd promised he wouldn't lose her. "Excuse me, sir?" A soft voice cut through the numbness. Daniel looked up. A woman stood a few feet away, holding his wallet like it was fragile. She was around 30, blonde hair tucked under a knit hat, cheeks pink from the winter air that clung to her coat. Calm eyes. Observant. The kind of face that didn't rush past anyone's pain. "Is this yours?" she asked. Daniel's throat tightened. "Where did you?" "By the escalator," she said, stepping closer. "I was going to turn it in, but I opened it to check the ID." She hesitated, then turned her palm upward. The ring lay there, bright in the artificial light, the gem catching a small flare like a heartbeat. Daniel stared at it, as if it might evaporate. That's my wife's," he said, voice rough. "She died 2 years ago." The woman's expression changed, not pity, not awkward sympathy. Something quieter, something lived in. "I'm sorry," she said. "I lost my husband too. Mark. Firefighter." A pause, controlled, like she'd learned to speak the truth without letting it drown her. "When I saw the ring, I couldn't leave it." Daniel took the ring with both hands. His fingers closed around it like a man holding onto a cliff edge. "You have no idea what this means," he managed. "I think I do," she said gently. "I'm Grace Miller." They stood there amid the dimming mall lights, two strangers stitched together by honesty and the strange mercy of timing. "Daniel Harper," he replied, and his voice steadied slightly when he said his own name, like remembering he still existed. The coffee kiosk was closing, but Daniel found himself asking, almost embarrassed, "Would you sit for a minute? Just to warm up?" Grace glanced at the emptying food court, then nodded once. "Okay." In a booth by the window, sunlight reflected off snow outside the parking lot. For a brief moment, the world looked clean, as if it could be restarted. Daniel turned Emily's ring between his fingers. "I used to keep it in my pocket," he admitted. "Told myself it was so I could feel close to her." Grace listened without interrupting. "But maybe I was just scared," he continued. "Like if I stopped touching it, she'd disappear for good." Grace folded her hands around a paper cup. "Letting go isn't the same as forgetting," she said. "People act like it is. It's not." The words landed in him with a strange precision. Not a speech. Not a slogan. Just truth. Daniel exhaled, shaky. Mark, how did he? Grace's gaze dropped, and when she spoke, her voice stayed steady even as the hurt showed at the edges. Line of duty call. It was fast. And after that, she swallowed. I kept getting punished for surviving. Daniel didn't understand yet, but the way she said it told him there was a person attached to that punishment. Someone with a name. Someone who still walked around free, carrying anger like a weapon. At the booth behind them, a man in a dark coat stood, pretending to check his phone. Daniel noticed him only because the man wasn't buying anything, just watching. Once Daniel's eyes met his, the man turned away too quickly and moved toward the exit. Grace didn't see it, or she pretended not to. Daniel's instincts, dulled by grief but not dead, quietly woke up. Grace pulled a pen from her bag and wrote a number on a receipt. In case you ever lose anything again, she said, attempting a small smile. Daniel stared at the paper, then at her. Thank you, he said, and the gratitude in his voice was deeper than the moment. Outside, the sky was still bright, winter sun low and golden. The kind of day that looked gentle from far away. As they walked toward their cars, Daniel slipped the ring back into his wallet. But this time, he didn't feel chained to it. He felt returned. At home later, Sophie, 8, sleepy, hair tangled, mumbled from the couch. Did you get Mommy's ring? Daniel knelt beside her and brushed her forehead. Yeah, kiddo, he whispered. I got it back. And for the first time in a long while, he wondered, quietly, cautiously, if something else might be coming back too. A week after the mall, Daniel Harper found himself checking his phone too often. It wasn't obsession. It wasn't desperation. It was something more unfamiliar, anticipation. The kind that made him feel guilty, as if hope itself was disloyal to Emily. Grace Miller texted in short, steady sentences. No forced cheer. No oversharing. Just simple, honest presence. Grace, snow's bright today. Sophie's concert tomorrow, right? Daniel, yeah. She's been practicing like the world depends on it. Grace, it probably does. For her. That line stuck with him for hours. On Saturday, Daniel took Sophie to the small park behind their apartment complex. The snow wasn't slushy or gray like most winters. It was clean and glittering under a pale blue sky, sunlight bouncing off it so hard you had to squint. Kids ran in puffy coats. Someone had built a lopsided snowman with a traffic cone for a nose. Sophie spotted Grace first. She's here, Sophie yelled, and bolted like she'd known the woman her whole life. Daniel's chest tightened, not with fear, but with the strange tenderness of seeing his child run toward warmth. Grace stood up from a bench, laughing softly as Sophie threw her arms around her. Grace looked different outside the mall. Hair loose, simple cream coat, scarf tucked neatly, cheeks rosy from the cold. She crouched to Sophie's level, spoke to her like she mattered. Hi, Sophie. Your dad says you're the bravest singer in the city. Sophie beamed. I'm doing the solo. Daniel blinked. You're doing the what? Sophie giggled and ran off to the swings before he could demand an explanation. Grace's eyes met his, apologetic but amused. She told me in a message, Grace said. I didn't realize it was a secret. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. I'm learning my daughter keeps more secrets than I do. Grace smiled, then grew quieter. It's good she still has excitement. He heard the unspoken part. Some kids lose that when the world goes wrong. They walked along the path while Sophie swung and shouted updates like a sports commentator. Daniel kept noticing little things about Grace. How she watched Sophie with protective attention. How she never stood with her back to a crowd for too long. How her smile arrived easily for a child, but only cautiously for him. Are you okay? Daniel asked. Grace hesitated. Yes. Daniel didn't push. He'd learned grief and pain were like locked doors. You couldn't shoulder your way in without breaking something. As they left the park, Daniel's phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Unknown, you should stop meeting her. Daniel froze mid-step. Grace was talking to Sophie, not looking at him. Daniel's thumb hovered over the screen like it was hot. Another message came. Unknown, she brings trouble. Ask her about Mark. Ask her who really got him killed. Daniel's stomach turned to ice. He glanced around. A few people. A couple walking a dog. A man in a dark coat by a vending machine near the parking lot, face half hidden under a hood. When Daniel looked directly at him, the man shifted and walked away too fast. Daniel's heart began to pound, not from fear for himself, but for Grace and Sophie. He cleared his throat, forced his voice steady. "Hey," he called gently. "Let's head out. Hot chocolate at home." Sophie cheered. Grace nodded, but Daniel saw something in her eyes. She'd noticed the change in his tone. In the car, Sophie chattered in the back seat, swinging her legs. Grace sat in the passenger seat, hands folded in her lap. When Sophie's voice faded into humming, Grace looked at Daniel. "What happened?" Daniel didn't answer at first. He drove, careful, scanning mirrors. Finally, he said, "Someone texted me." Grace's fingers tightened. "What did it say?" Daniel passed her the phone at a red light. Grace read the messages. The color drained from her face so quickly it scared him. Her voice came out thin. "Thomas." Daniel's eyes flicked to her. "Thomas is my brother-in-law," Grace said. "Mark's brother." The light turned green. Daniel drove on, jaw locked. Why would he do this? Grace stared out at the bright snow like it offended her. Because he needs someone to blame. And because he thinks, if he scares people away from me, I'll come crawling back where he can control the story. Daniel felt anger rise. Clean, sharp, protective. Control what story? Grace swallowed. Mark died in a fire that shouldn't have happened. There were safety issues. Equipment that hadn't been replaced. Someone signed off on things that weren't true. Daniel's grip tightened on the steering wheel. And Thomas? Grace's voice dropped. Thomas works for the city's procurement office. He had influence. He always acted like Mark was his trophy, his hero brother. After the funeral, he started showing up at my place, checking on me, then accusing me of being ungrateful when I didn't let him in. Daniel's mind flickered back. I kept getting punished for surviving. He felt sick. And now? Daniel asked. Grace's eyes glistened, but she fought it back. Now I'm trying to move forward. And he won't let me. Daniel pulled into his apartment parking lot. The sun was still bright, the world still pretty, which almost made everything worse, because evil didn't belong in weather like this. Sophie hopped out first, bouncing toward the door. Daniel waited until she was a few steps ahead, then turned to Grace. "You're safe with us," he said simply. Grace gave a small, strained laugh. "Daniel, you don't understand. Thomas doesn't just yell. Daniel interrupted, gentle but firm. "Then we'll understand together." Grace stared at him like she wasn't used to anyone saying we. Upstairs, Sophie was already in the kitchen, demanding marshmallows. Daniel watched Grace take off her coat slowly, like she expected the walls to reject her. He poured hot chocolate, then set Emily's ring, still in his wallet, on the counter without thinking. A reflex. Grace noticed it. Her gaze softened. "You still carry it," she said quietly. Daniel nodded. "But I'm starting to learn it doesn't have to mean I'm stuck." Grace's expression tightened again, as if she wanted to believe that, but didn't know how. Then there was a knock at the door. Not a polite knock. A hard, sharp odor that rattled the frame. Sophie froze mid-sip. Her eyes widened. Grace's face went white. Daniel moved between them and the door, his body reacting before his brain finished catching up. Another odor. A man's voice on the other side. Low, angry, and too confident. "Grace, open up." Daniel's blood turned cold. Grace whispered, barely audible, "Thomas found me." Daniel didn't raise his voice. He didn't rush. That surprised even him. He held up one finger towards Sophie, a quiet, practiced signal she'd learned after her mother died. "Stay still. Stay quiet." Sophie nodded, clutching her mug with both hands. The knock came again. Louder. "Grace," the man called. "I know you're in there." Daniel stepped closer to the door, but didn't open it. He rested his palm against the wood, grounding himself. Years ago, he might have reacted differently. Anger first, words later. Grief had stripped that from him, replaced it with something colder and steadier. "She doesn't want to talk to you," Daniel said through the door. His voice was calm, controlled. "You should leave." There was a short, humorless laugh from the other side. "And who are you supposed to be?" Daniel didn't answer right away. He glanced back once, to make sure Sophie was still frozen in place, to make sure Grace wasn't breaking. Then, "Someone who's not afraid of you." Silence. Then Thomas spoke again, quieter now. "Dangerous. You don't know what she's done." Daniel leaned his forehead lightly against the doorframe. "I know she lost her husband. I know you're trying to make that her fault." A pause. Daniel imagined Thomas's face, tight with rage, convinced the world owed him agreement. "You let her lie to you?" Thomas snapped. "She was there that night. She distracted Mark. If she hadn't, that's enough." Daniel said. Still calm. Still even. But now there was steel under it. You don't get to rewrite his death just so you don't have to live with it. Behind him, Grace made a sound. Half sob, half breath she'd been holding for years. Thomas slammed his fist once against the door. Sophie flinched. Daniel's jaw clenched. You come near this apartment again, Daniel continued. Or you send another message, or you scare my daughter one more time. I'll call the police. And this time, I won't explain anything away. There it was, the thing Thomas hadn't expected. Not shouting. Not pleading. Boundaries. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then footsteps retreated. Heavy. Angry. Fading down the hall. Daniel waited until he couldn't hear them anymore. Counted to 10. Then 20. Only then did he turn around. Grace had slid down against the wall, knees pulled to her chest, shaking. Sophie stood a few feet away, unsure whether she was allowed to move. Daniel crouched and opened his arms. Sophie ran into them immediately. He held her until her breathing slowed. Then he looked at Grace. He's gone, Daniel said softly. For now? Grace nodded, but her hands wouldn't stop trembling. I thought, she whispered, that if I stayed quiet, he'd stop. Daniel sat on the floor across from her, not touching, just present. People like that don't stop because you're quiet. They stop when they lose power. Grace let out a broken laugh. He always said Mark belonged to him. His hero. His legacy. Her eyes filled. But Mark chose me. And Thomas never forgave either of us for that. Daniel thought of Emily. How people had tried to define her after she was gone. How they'd told him how to grieve. How long. How loudly. He understood more than he wanted to. That night, after Sophie fell asleep on the couch with a blanket and cartoons still playing, Daniel and Grace sat at the small kitchen table. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the heater. Grace finally spoke. The safety reports Mark filed, they disappeared. And Thomas was the one who approved the replacements that never came. Daniel's eyes sharpened. You think he covered something up? I know he did, Grace said. And I think he's scared I'll talk. Daniel glanced at his phone on the counter, the unknown number, the threats. Pieces aligning. You won't face this alone, Daniel said. But we'll do it the right way. Honest. Clean. Grace studied him, searching for cracks. Finding none. You barely know me, she said. Daniel looked toward the living room, where Sophie slept peacefully. I know what it's like to lose someone and have the world keep moving like nothing happened. And I know what it's like when someone finally tells the truth. Grace's eyes filled again, but this time, something else was there too. Relief. Outside, the winter night was clear and bright, moonlight reflecting off untouched snow. For the first time since Mark died, Grace believed the truth might actually survive the cold. And Daniel, sitting at his small kitchen table, wallet resting nearby, realized that losing Emily's ring had never been the real test. Finding the courage to stand up for someone else was. The next morning arrived bright and cold, sunlight flooding the apartment as if the night before had been nothing more than a bad dream. But Daniel Harper felt the weight of it the moment he opened his eyes. He lay still, listening. Sophie's soft breathing drifted from her room. The heater clicked on and off. No shouting. No knocking. Peace. Temporary, fragile peace. At the kitchen table, Grace sat with a mug she hadn't touched. Her coat was already on, as if she'd been ready to run the moment the door opened. I didn't sleep, she admitted quietly when Daniel joined her. Neither did I, he said. He poured coffee, then paused. We don't rush this. But we don't hide either. Grace nodded. I kept everything. Copies. Emails Mark forwarded to me because he was scared something would happen to them. Daniel looked at her sharply, scared enough to plan for his own death. Grace swallowed. Yes. They spread the papers across the table after Sophie left for school. Maintenance requests stamped approved, equipment orders marked delivered that never were, a final message from Mark sent hours before the fire. If anything happens, don't let them erase this. Daniel felt a cold clarity settle in his chest. This wasn't just grief. This was truth buried under convenience. We take this to the right people, Daniel said. Internal affairs. A reporter. Someone Thomas can't lean on. Grace hesitated. He'll retaliate. Daniel didn't deny it. He already is. That afternoon, as if summoned by the decision itself, Daniel's phone rang. Unknown number again. He put it on speaker. You think you're a hero now? Thomas's voice sneered. You have no idea who you're protecting. Daniel kept his voice level. I know exactly who she is. And I know who you are. A pause. Then, venomous. You keep pushing this. Your daughter's life gets very complicated. Daniel's blood ran cold, but his voice didn't change. You threaten my child again, and this stops being about paperwork. The call ended. Grace covered her mouth. Daniel, I'm so sorry. I never wanted. Daniel shook his head. This isn't on you, and you don't get to carry it alone. That evening, they met with a journalist Daniel trusted, an old college friend who'd left corporate reporting after refusing to kill a story. The man listened, silent, as Grace laid everything out. When she finished, the journalist leaned back. If this is real, he said, it's big and dangerous. It's real, Daniel replied. And people already died because it was buried. The story moved fast after that. Too fast for comfort. Questions reached the fire department. Procurement files were flagged. Thomas stopped texting, but that silence felt worse than threats. One afternoon, Daniel found Grace standing by the window, staring at the snow melting in the sun. If this destroys what's left of Mark's family, she whispered. Daniel stepped beside her. Truth doesn't destroy families. Lies do. Grace looked at him, eyes searching. And us. Daniel didn't answer immediately. He took Emily's ring from his wallet and set it gently on the windowsill, sunlight catching the blue gem. Emily will always be part of my life, he said. But she wouldn't want me living in a mausoleum. Grace's breath hitched. I don't know what tomorrow brings, Daniel continued. But I know who I want to face it with. Grace didn't speak. She simply rested her hand beside the ring, not touching it, but close. Outside, the snow glistened, thinning under the sun. Winter wasn't ending yet. But something was beginning. The story broke on a Tuesday morning, under a sky so clear it felt almost cruel. Daniel stood in the kitchen, listening to the radio while Sophie tied her shoes. The announcer's voice was measured, professional, but the words landed heavy. An internal investigation has been opened into procurement practices linked to the city fire department. Evidence suggests falsified safety reports. Grace sat at the table, hands clasped, eyes closed. When the announcer mentioned Mark by name, not as a hero myth, but as a man who had warned people, Grace's shoulders shook. Daniel reached across the table. This time, he did touch her hand. By noon, Thomas was suspended. By evening, his name was everywhere. Not the way he'd imagined it would be. No praise, no righteous anger on his behalf. Just facts, documents, consequences. He tried calling once. Daniel didn't answer. A week later, charges followed. Grace expected to feel relief. Instead, what came first was exhaustion. The kind that seeps into your bones after you've held yourself upright for too long. It's over, she said one evening, standing in Daniel's living room as Sophie drew on the floor between them. Daniel shook his head gently. No, it's finished. That's different. Grace smiled faintly at the distinction. Life didn't suddenly become perfect. Daniel still woke some nights reaching for someone who wasn't there. Grace still flinched at raised voices. Sophie still missed her mother in quiet, private ways she didn't always have words for. But the house felt warmer now. One afternoon, weeks later, they walked through the same mall where everything had begun. Holiday lights were gone. The crowds thinner. Sunlight still poured through the glass ceiling. Daniel stopped near the escalator. This is where it happened, he said. Grace nodded. Where you lost something. Daniel took out his wallet. He opened it, but the silver ring wasn't there. Grace noticed immediately. Her eyes widened slightly. I left it at home, Daniel said. In Sophie's jewelry box. She asked if she could keep it safe. Grace swallowed. And are you? Daniel thought of Emily. Not as pain, but as memory. As gratitude. I am, he said simply. They sat in the same cafe, now fully open, sunlight spilling across the table. Daniel watched Grace laugh at something Sophie said. Watched the way Sophie leaned into her without hesitation. A quiet certainty settled in him. That evening, as the sun dipped low and the snow reflected gold, Daniel stood at the window with Grace beside him. He didn't pull out a ring. He didn't make promises the future might not keep. He just said, honestly, I'm glad you stayed. Grace rested her head against his shoulder. I'm glad you spoke up. Sophie looked up from the floor. Are you guys happy? Daniel smiled, really smiled, and met Grace's eyes. Yes, he said. We are. The winter outside was still cold. Life still uncertain. But Daniel Harper finally understood something grief had hidden from him for years. Life doesn't always return what you lose. Sometimes, it gives you the chance to live again. If you're brave enough to be honest and kind enough to stay. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe for more stories that stay with you.